Ma'am, step away from the trunk now. Hands where I can see them.
Officer, I am a judge. This is my vehicle.
Ma'am.
Excuse me? I'm loading my...
Hands out of here.
My hands are plain sight. This is my car.
I don't care. I need ID. I need to
I'm
see
not going to
identification.
investigate.
Stop arguing.
I said stop arguing. Yells.
I never thought loading groceries into my trunk would change my entire life. But that Saturday afternoon in the parking lot of Riverside Plaza, I learned that being right doesn't always protect you. That knowing the law doesn't shield you from someone who's never bothered to learn it. And that the color of your skin can make you a suspect even when you're holding your own car keys. My name is Marlena Cross, and I'm a federal magistrate judge for the Eastern District of Michigan. I've spent 22 years in the legal system, 14 of those years on the bench. I've presided over hundreds of cases involving constitutional violations, police misconduct, and Fourth Amendment disputes. I've written judicial opinions that law students study. I've sent corrupt officers to prison. I've ruled on qualified immunity cases that set precedent across multiple circuits. None of that mattered when Officer Ryan Kellerman decided I looked suspicious. It was February 14th. Valentine's Day. I'd taken the afternoon off, something I rarely do. My husband Marcus was working a double shift at the hospital, so I decided to treat myself to some shopping. Nothing extravagant. Home goods, a few books, some fancy chocolates. The kind of ordinary Saturday that thousands of people experience without incident. Riverside Plaza is an upscale outdoor shopping center on the north side of Detroit. Clean sidewalks, high-end retailers, expensive cars in the parking lot. I'd been there dozens of times. I parked my Lexus ES in the main lot, spent about 2 hours browsing stores, and emerged with 4 shopping bags and a good mood. The weather was cold but clear. About 32 degrees with bright sunshine that made the snow sparkle. I was wearing dark jeans, leather boots, a cream-colored sweater, and my favorite charcoal wool coat. My hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. I looked exactly like what I was, a professional woman enjoying her day off. I popped my trunk using the key fob and started arranging my bags. I'm particular about how I load things. Heavier items in back, delicate purchases toward the front. I was completely absorbed in the mundane task of organizing shopping bags when I heard the voice behind me. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from that vehicle." The tone wasn't a request. It was a command. Sharp, authoritative, with an edge that made my stomach tighten instinctively. I turned around slowly, keeping my hands visible. Years of being a black woman in America had taught me that much. A white male officer was approaching me, mid-30s, medium build, with pale blue eyes that were locked on me with absolute certainty. His right hand rested on his service weapon. Not gripping it, but positioned. Ready. His nameplate read Kellerman. "Is there a problem, officer?" I kept my voice calm and neutral. "I asked you to step away from the vehicle." He was about 10 feet away now, closing the distance with measured steps. "This is my vehicle." I held up my key fob. "I'm loading my purchases. I'm going to need to see some identification." My legal training kicked in immediately. This was a seizure under the Fourth Amendment. By detaining me, Officer Kellerman had initiated a legal process that required reasonable articulable suspicion of criminal activity. I quickly assessed my options. I could comply immediately and sort it out later. Or I could exercise my constitutional right to know why I was being detained. I chose the latter. "Officer Kellerman, I'm happy to cooperate, but I need to know the legal basis for this stop. What reasonable suspicion do you have that I'm engaged in criminal activity?" His jaw tightened. "We received a call about suspicious activity in this parking lot." "What specific suspicious activity?" "A person matching your description acting suspiciously near vehicles." I felt the familiar weight settle in my chest. The weight that every black person knows. The weight of being presumed guilty for existing in a space someone else decided you didn't belong. "What description would that be?" I asked quietly. "Black female, medium build, dark clothing, near a luxury vehicle." "So you're detaining me because I'm a black woman near an expensive car?" "Ma'am, I'm not going to argue with you." Identification. Now, other shoppers were starting to notice. A middle-aged white couple slowed their walk to their car. A younger black man pushing a shopping cart stopped entirely, his eyes moving between me and the officer. I saw a teenage girl about 50 feet away pull out her phone and angle it in our direction. Officer, I'm not arguing. I'm asking you to articulate reasonable suspicion. That's not obstruction. That's my constitutional right under Terry versus Ohio. Kellerman's face flushed. Are you refusing to show me identification? I'm asking you to establish legal grounds for demanding it. The legal grounds are that I'm conducting an investigation. An investigation into what crime? Possible vehicle tampering. I own this vehicle. I have the key fob. The registration matches my license. There's no tampering occurring. I'll determine that after I see your identification. I made a decision. I would comply, but I would do it on the record. I would document every detail. I would make sure this encounter was preserved for exactly what it was. Officer Kellerman, I'm going to reach into my purse now to retrieve my wallet. I want to state clearly for any recording devices that this stop appears to lack reasonable suspicion and may constitute a Fourth Amendment violation. I'm complying under protest. I moved slowly, deliberately. My movements were careful and visible. I reached into my shoulder bag and pulled out my black leather wallet. Inside were several forms of identification. My driver's license, my federal judiciary credentials, my Michigan bar card, my courthouse security pass, various credit cards with my name embossed in raised letters. I handed him my driver's license first. Kellerman examined it. Marlena Cross, he read aloud. The address matched the vehicle registration visible through my windshield. This your car? Yes. Prove it. I pressed the lock button on my key fob. The Lexus lights flashed and the locks clicked with a solid thunk. I pressed unlock. The lights flashed again and the doors opened with a soft electronic chirp. Satisfied? I asked. He should have apologized right then. He should have acknowledged the mistake and walked away. But Officer Ryan Kellerman had a different problem. He'd made this stop in front of multiple witnesses. He'd escalated the situation. And in his mind, backing down would signal weakness. So he doubled down. You're being uncooperative and belligerent. I need you to wait here while I verify this information. Verify what information? My license is valid. The vehicle is registered in my name. I've demonstrated ownership. What is there to verify? I need to make sure there are no outstanding warrants. You need probable cause to extend this detention beyond the time necessary to dispel reasonable suspicion. You've already established that I own this vehicle and have proper identification. Extending this stop to run a warrant check without additional cause is unconstitutional. Kellerman's hand moved back to his weapon. Ma'am, are you a lawyer? Yes. I'm also a federal magistrate judge. The parking lot seemed to hold its breath. Kellerman stared at me. His expression shifted through several emotions. Disbelief, suspicion, anger, uncertainty. A federal judge, he repeated flatly. United States District Court, Eastern District of Michigan. I've been on the bench for 14 years. And you've just violated my Fourth Amendment rights in a manner so clearly established that qualified immunity won't protect you. The color drained from Kellerman's face, but his training took over. Or maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the inability to admit error. Whatever it was, he made a choice that would cost him everything. I need to see proof of that claim. I reached back into my wallet and pulled out my federal credentials. The official identification card issued by the United States courts. My photograph. My full name. My title, Magistrate Judge. The seal of the federal judiciary embossed in gold. The holographic security features that made forgery nearly impossible. Kellerman took the credentials with hands that were now visibly shaking. He studied them for a long moment. I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. The realization of what he'd done. The desperate search for a way out. This could be fake, he said, but his voice had lost all authority. Call the federal courthouse. The main number is publicly listed. Ask for the clerk's office. They'll verify my identity in under 2 minutes. The young man who'd been watching called out from his position near his car. I got all this on video, ma'am. Everything. Kellerman's head snapped toward the witness. You need to. I need to do nothing, the young man interrupted. This is a public place. I'm allowed to record. Kellerman turned back to me. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to remain here. Officer Kellerman, this detention has already exceeded any reasonable time frame. You've established my identity. You've confirmed vehicle ownership. You have no reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. Am I free to go? No. On what legal basis? On the basis that I'm not finished with my investigation. What investigation? I've answered every question. I've provided identification. I've demonstrated ownership. What specific articulable facts support continued detention? Kellerman didn't answer. He walked back to his patrol car with my license and credentials still in his hand. I stood next to my Lexus, trunk still open, shopping bags half-loaded, and watched him sit in his vehicle for nearly 7 minutes. The teenage girl was definitely recording now. I could see her phone clearly pointed in our direction. The young man was still watching. The couple who'd stopped earlier had gotten into their car but hadn't left. They were sitting in their vehicle, watching through the windshield. This was being documented. Whatever happened next, there would be evidence. After 7 minutes, Kellerman emerged from his patrol car. His expression had hardened into something worse than uncertainty. It had settled into determination. The determination of someone who's made a bad decision and decided to commit to it fully. Ma'am, I need to search your vehicle. My heart rate increased, but my voice stayed level. On what basis? I have reasonable suspicion that there may be stolen merchandise in your vehicle. Based on what? The initial report mentioned suspicious behavior near vehicles. I need to verify that your purchases are legitimate. I have receipts for everything in these bags. The bags themselves are from stores in this plaza. Your reasonable suspicion is based on what specific articulable facts? Your defensive behavior gives me reasonable suspicion. I almost smiled. Almost. No, officer. It doesn't. Asserting constitutional rights is not evidence of criminal activity. Illinois versus Wardlow establishes that clearly. You cannot use my refusal to consent to a search as justification for reasonable suspicion. That's circular reasoning and it's explicitly unconstitutional. Kellerman's face was bright red now. Step away from the vehicle. I'm not consenting to any search. I don't need your consent if I have reasonable suspicion. You don't have reasonable suspicion. You have a black woman in an expensive car and you've made assumptions based on racial bias. That's not reasonable suspicion. That's profiling. Ma'am, you need to step away from the vehicle right now, or I will place you under arrest for obstruction. Obstruction of what? There's no lawful investigation occurring. You're violating my rights, and you know it. Kellerman pulled out his handcuffs. My training told me to comply. My experience told me to document everything. My anger told me to fight. But my survival instinct, the one that every black person develops, told me that fighting a police officer in a parking lot could get me killed. Officer Kellerman, if you're going to arrest me, do it. But understand that everything you're doing right now is being recorded by multiple witnesses. My credentials are in your hand. You know exactly who I am. And you're making a decision that will end your career. He stepped toward me. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. I complied. I turned slowly, placed my hands behind my back, and felt the metal handcuffs click around my wrists. They were tight. Too tight. The steel bit into my skin. You're under arrest for obstruction of justice and resisting a police investigation. There was no justice to obstruct and no lawful investigation to resist. Kellerman walked me to his patrol car. The short walk felt endless. Every step was watched by the growing number of witnesses. Someone else had pulled out their phone. A woman was talking urgently on a phone call, describing what she was seeing. The back seat of the patrol car was hard plastic, designed to be hosed down and impossible to damage. It smelled like industrial cleaner and something else. Fear, maybe. Or despair. The smell of all the people who'd sat there before me. Kellerman got in the front seat. He sat there for a long moment without starting the engine. I could see his reflection in the rearview mirror. His hands gripped the steering wheel. His knuckles were white. You're making a mistake, I said quietly. He didn't respond. He started the car and drove. The ride to the police station took 14 minutes. Neither of us spoke. I used the time to mentally catalog every detail. The time of the initial stop. The specific words Kellerman had used. The sequence of events. The witnesses. The video recordings. Every element that would matter in the lawsuit I was already constructing in my mind. When we arrived at the precinct, Kellerman brought me inside through the rear entrance. Other officers looked up from their work. I saw their expressions. The casual assessment. Just another arrest. Just another person in handcuffs. Nothing unusual. Kellerman brought me to the processing area. A female officer with sergeant stripes and Torres on her nameplate was assigned to handle my booking. Sergeant Diana Torres was in her late 40s with sharp eyes and an air of absolute competence. She'd clearly done this thousands of times. She began the standard procedure. Personal property removed and catalogued. Phone, keys, wallet, jewelry, watch. When Torres opened my wallet, she paused. Her eyes moved to my federal credentials. She pulled out the identification card and studied it carefully. Then she looked at me, then at Kellerman. "Where did you arrest her?" Torres asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Riverside Plaza parking lot." What was she doing? Loading items into her vehicle. There was a suspicious person call. Torres held up my credentials. "Did you verify these?" "I think they might be fake." Torres had processed enough arrests to recognize every kind of forged credential criminals carried. She examined the card closely. The holographic seal. The micro-printing along the edges. The weight and texture of the cardstock. The subtle security features that most people never noticed. These weren't fake. She set the card down carefully and walked directly out of the processing area. I watched her go straight to an office with Captain stenciled on the frosted glass door. She knocked once and entered without waiting for an answer. Captain James Rothwell had been with the Detroit Police Department for 26 years. He'd worked his way up from patrol officer to precinct captain. He'd handled difficult arrests, controversial cases, and situations that made the evening news. But when Sergeant Torres walked into his office holding federal judicial credentials, his stomach dropped. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see it through the glass. Torres showing him the credentials. Rothwell standing up abruptly. His expression shifting from confusion to alarm to something that looked like dread. Rothwell walked to the processing area. He looked at me sitting in the holding chair, hands still cuffed behind my back. He looked at the credentials in Torres's hand. Then he walked back to his office and picked up his phone. The call lasted 4 minutes. When he hung up, he looked like he'd received very bad news. He returned to the processing area. Judge Cross. His voice was formal and strained. "I'm Captain Rothwell. I apologize for this situation. You're being released immediately." "What was I being charged with?" I asked. "That's being reviewed by our supervisory staff. I want everything in writing. The initial call details. The body camera footage. The dash camera footage. Officer Kellerman's written statement of probable cause. All booking documentation. Everything." Rothwell nodded. "We'll provide that. How long will that take?" "We can have digital copies ready within 48 hours. I want them by tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. Rothwell looked at me for a long moment. He recognized authority when he heard it. "We'll have them ready, Your Honor." The handcuffs were removed. My belongings were returned. Torres personally apologized twice while returning each item. Captain Rothwell escorted me to the front entrance and apologized 3 more times before I called a car service. I arrived home at 8:30 that evening. I'd been detained for 3 hours and 47 minutes. I sat in my study for a long time, not moving, processing what had happened. Then I picked up my phone. The first call went to Chief Judge Patricia Hoffman of the Eastern District of Michigan. The second call went to my law school classmate who now ran one of the state's premier civil rights firms. The third call went to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. By Monday morning, the incident was being discussed at the highest levels of both the federal court system and the Detroit Police Department. Police Chief Daniel Vasquez personally called me to apologize. I listened politely. I told him I appreciated the call but would be filing a federal civil rights lawsuit regardless. The lawsuit was filed on Wednesday. 28 pages, single-spaced, with citations to Supreme Court precedent and references to specific timestamps in the video evidence and police recordings. The complaint alleged unlawful seizure, unlawful arrest, violation of Fourth Amendment rights, violation of 14th Amendment equal protection rights, racial profiling, and municipal liability for inadequate training and supervision. It named Officer Ryan Kellerman individually and the City of Detroit as defendants. The city's legal department reviewed the case. They watched the parking lot security footage. They watched Kellerman's body camera recording. They listened to the audio. They read my credentials. They reviewed Kellerman's incident report, which contained multiple inaccuracies and omissions. Then they called an emergency meeting with the police chief and the city corporation counsel. "This is indefensible," the senior assistant corporation counsel said bluntly. "We detained a sitting federal judge for loading her own car with legitimate purchases. The video evidence is clear. We have no viable legal defense. We need to settle this quickly." But before settlement negotiations could begin, the story became public. A local news outlet received the parking lot video from one of the witnesses. They ran the story that evening: federal judge arrested while shopping. By midnight, it was national news. By morning, it was trending on social media. The video was posted online. Within 48 hours, it had been viewed over 8 million times. Within a week, the count exceeded 20 million. The comment sections exploded. People shared their own experiences with police profiling. Legal experts dissected every violation Kellerman had committed. Civil rights organizations used the case as evidence of systemic problems. The Detroit Police Department opened an internal affairs investigation. They assigned their most senior investigator, a lieutenant with a reputation for thoroughness and fairness. The investigation took 5 weeks. They interviewed Kellerman repeatedly. They reviewed every second of available footage. They analyzed the suspicious person call that had initiated everything. They examined Kellerman's history of stops and arrests. The findings were devastating. The suspicious person call had been made by a private security guard working for the Plaza Management Company. When investigators pressed him on what suspicious behavior he'd observed, he admitted he couldn't articulate anything specific. Just that I'd seemed out of place near expensive vehicles. When asked to clarify what out of place meant, he couldn't. Or wouldn't. Kellerman had responded to that vague call and immediately focused on me based solely on race. He detained me without reasonable suspicion. He'd continued the detention far beyond any reasonable time frame. He'd requested a search without probable cause. He'd arrested me for asserting constitutional rights. Every single action violated department policy and constitutional law. The investigation also uncovered patterns in Kellerman's history. Over the previous 4 years, he'd stopped black motorists at a rate 3.1 times higher than the department average. His searches of black motorists were 3.7 times higher. His use of force incidents showed similar disparities. The pattern had been there for years. The data had been collected. But nobody had analyzed it. Nobody had connected the dots. Nobody had intervened. Officer Ryan Kellerman was terminated 8 weeks after the incident. The termination letter cited multiple violations: unlawful detention, unlawful arrest, racial profiling, false reporting, violation of department general orders, and conduct unbecoming an officer. Kellerman appealed through his union. His union representative reviewed all the evidence and told him what everyone else was telling him: the case was indefensible. The video was too clear. The victim was too credible. The violations were too numerous. Kellerman withdrew his appeal. But his termination was just the beginning of the consequences. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division opened a pattern and practice investigation into the Detroit Police Department's stop-and-search policies. They wanted to know if Kellerman's conduct was isolated or symptomatic of broader systemic issues. The investigation took 11 months. They analyzed 7 years of stop data. They reviewed thousands of police reports. They interviewed hundreds of officers and community members. They examined training materials, supervision practices, and disciplinary records. Their findings were released in a 112-page report. The data showed clear patterns. Black residents were stopped at rates significantly higher than white residents, even after controlling for neighborhood crime rates and demographics. Black motorists were searched at rates nearly 4 times higher, despite being less likely to have contraband. Use of force incidents showed similar racial disparities. The Detroit Police Department entered into a consent decree with the Department of Justice. The reforms were comprehensive and mandatory. All officers would receive enhanced training in constitutional policing, implicit bias, and de-escalation. An early warning system would flag officers with problematic patterns. A civilian oversight commission would have real investigative authority and subpoena power. All stops would be subject to regular statistical analysis by race and neighborhood. Body cameras would be mandatory and footage would be retained longer. Federal monitors would oversee compliance for 5 years. My lawsuit settled 14 months after the incident. The settlement amount was confidential, but sources familiar with the negotiations confirmed it was substantial. Over $600,000. I donated the entire settlement to 3 civil rights organizations working on police reform, criminal justice policy, and legal defense for communities affected by discriminatory policing. I don't need the money, I told reporters in my only public statement. I need the system to change. I need people who don't have my resources and credentials to be protected from what happened to me. I need this to be a catalyst for real reform. The parking lot footage became required training material at police academies throughout Michigan. It was used in law school constitutional law classes. Civil rights organizations used it in community education programs. One detention in a parking lot led to a terminated career, a major financial settlement, a federal consent decree, and systemic reforms that affected how an entire police department operates. Ryan Kellerman never worked in law enforcement again. His termination for cause made him unhireable to other agencies. He couldn't find work in private security. He eventually left Michigan. He gave one interview to a television reporter, claiming he'd followed his training and that I'd been uncooperative. The reporter asked him if he'd watched the video footage. Kellerman said he had. The reporter asked him to describe the specific suspicious behavior I'd exhibited. Kellerman couldn't answer. I returned to the bench. I continued presiding over cases, including several involving police misconduct. Colleagues told me the experience made me even more attentive to civil rights issues in my courtroom. In private conversations with other judges and attorneys, I've acknowledged that what happened to me wasn't unique. It was just documented. Thousands of Black Americans experience similar treatment regularly. But they don't have federal credentials. They don't have legal knowledge. They don't have the resources to fight back. That's why I insisted the footage be made public. That's why I donated the settlement. So the incident could become a teaching moment. So people could see what racial profiling looks like. So officers could learn that assumptions aren't evidence and bias isn't reasonable suspicion. The security camera footage is still available online. You can watch it yourself. You can see what happened. You can form your own conclusions about justice, accountability, and the work that still needs to be done. What would you have done in my situation? Thanks for watching. Do remember to hit the subscribe button, like and share this story, and I'll see you in the next one.